Hello. I hope this semester is treating you well so far. Um, as we talk about learning styles and icebreakers this week, some of us process and learn things differently. And so some of us learn best if we're given a chance to write and, have the experience of actually writing something out and then reading what we wrote, and others talking and others reading, etc. So I'm going to try to give a variety of modalities throughout the class in engaging different types of learners. And so throughout this video, I'm going to offer a couple moments for folks to pause and maybe do some writing. And if that isn't your style, try it on and see what happens. So I'm also going to be looking at notes on another screen. So if you see my eyes wander, that's what I'm doing. I want to start with a question and also an invitation. So folks who know me know that in my classes, I like to start with like a moment, just like a moment to arrive, really just for myself, and an invitation for the class to arrive together. And that doesn't have to be like, it's not like a cross-legged meditation. It's really just an opportunity for me to like arrive and not be lost in past thoughts or future brain, right? Planning the next thing. So I don't know about you, but have you ever been sitting in a place and thinking about something else, planning what you're going to do later, thinking about something that didn't go right the night before? So I'm going to invite you to just sit however you're sitting, your desk, your couch, with your feet flat on the floor, just for a moment. Just try it on with me and relax anything in your hands. And if you want to close your eyes, you can close your eyes and just take 2-3 breaths to just arrive, to find yourself, to give yourself permission to just arrive. So often I'm going from thing to thing to thing, and I don't get a moment to fully land. Maybe if you're looking around the room, just relax your gaze, relax the space between your eyes. If your eyes are closed, just see if you can relax your eyelids, relax your shoulders, maybe your jaw, and any other place in your body where you typically hold tension, maybe your belly. And one more breath, and I'm going to invite you to come back. And it's a little awkward to do this in a video, and yet I already just feel like a little bit of a shift in my availability. And so as a instructor, facilitator, educator, if I can take that moment, I feel like I can be more present with folks. I can be a better listener with my participants or with my students. So thank you for trying that on with me. I am curious how the first week or 2 weeks are going of your semester. And if we were live in person in class or a workshop together, I might give you a minute to free write. So you can take this invitation to pause this video for 30 seconds, 1 minute, and in your notebook, your journal, just write, how the semester is going for you so far. And this can be an exercise I would do, and you can then prompt folks to share with a neighbor or just share out with the class, never really requiring students to read word for word what they wrote, especially if it's personal. So paying attention to how you frame the prompt, saying, this writing is just for you. So I'm telling you, this writing is just for you. You're not going to have to share word for word. I might invite you to share the essence of what you wrote, but never would I ask someone to share word for word. And then also giving the option for folks to pass. These invitations, I'm being transparent and trying to really to step back and show you how careful I am in framing some kind of activity like this. So take a moment to just reflect on how school is going for you so far. And you can pause this video if you choose. And if you paused it, you can resume it. And if you didn't pause it, I understand, and we'll just keep moving along. This could be an icebreaker activity where we can, invite folks to share with a neighbor or a small group, intentionally making it informal, just an opportunity, especially for a brand new group of people, to reflect on something that's not too deep, too much of a deep dive. And you could go around to a word or phrase that represents what you wrote or represents your experience from the first week. just something to get folks moving along. So introductions and icebreakers, why do we do them? I want you to think back to experiences, maybe classes, maybe summer camp, whatever that is, classes you've led maybe, or workshops you've led, workshops you've been a participant in, just any kind of, educational or community experience that comes to mind. What kind of icebreakers did you do? Just think about that for a moment. And think about, why do we do them? So before I lecture at you, I'm curious just to kind of get your brain juices flowing. What's the purpose of an icebreaker, and what are some examples? If you want to pause and jot some down, you can. In this class, we're going to be in a semester-long inquiry about how we learn, because this informs how we show up to engage people more fully. So my objectives are to revisit, because I think icebreakers aren't brand new for many of you, clarify the use of icebreakers in building community, and introduce learning styles and VARC modalities, which we'll be diving into, and connect learning styles to sustainable ag and food systems education. So we'll be talking about this a little bit more explicitly as we go, and I'll also be making connections to the reading that we'll be doing with bell hooks. So these are just a few of my objectives. In this class, you're going to have two hats on. You're going to be a student. You're participating in this class as a student. And you're also going to be looking at some of the modalities and the ways I choose to engage folks, and looking at how would I modify that activity, or how could I modify that approach in my own teaching. So you'll be looking at it from a teaching perspective. Not that my videos or my tools are going to be, outrageous or exemplary. Some of these might be really familiar to you and others maybe not. So just to kind of build, not that your toolboxes are empty, but to build in your already existing toolboxes of what kind of activities and what kind of approaches can we use to engage people more fully, right? Not to just jump into the lecture and just start lecturing at you about icebreakers. Instead, I'm going to engage you in an icebreaker, debrief the icebreaker, talk about why we do icebreakers. You see what I mean? So I want to also name that Bell Hooks she's a seminal author, and she passed away in the last year on critical learning theory. She has been a huge influence to me in my teaching, and we will unpack critical learning theory as the semester goes on, and more fully we'll take a deeper dive, especially as we look at critical pedagogy in a theory popularized by Brazilian scholar Paulo Freire. So we're going to look at these things as the semester goes on. But in short, critical learning theory in this context refers to questioning and challenging the mainstream education as we know it, and emphasizes the need for more engaging ways we really address and recognize students are whole human beings. So an example of this, that standardized test scores, for example, in formal education settings, they don't work for everyone. I don't need to tell you that. And there should be additional ways, and there is a movement for expanding the ways that we measure student intelligence, even in K through 12 public settings, but especially on farm settings where we have a lot more freedom to engage people. How do we break out of the ways of education that we learned that aren't engaging, and really create and inhabit more engaging ways of getting to know each other and build community, and hold educational space that's more equitable, that's more inclusive, and that's just more human, right? So I tested horribly in school, and I probably still do, and I did better in qualitative assessments. So the author we read, Bell Hooks, doesn't write specifically about agriculture or food systems, but writes more broadly concepts about engagement, well-being, belonging, fulfillment, and equity in education. And I find these aspects to be relevant, particularly to our objective in this course about how we build community. So we're starting with Bell Hooks. Many of us in this class are trying to teach in, or already do teach in, community settings. And I know from my experience just that if I'm not invested in a topic, if the teacher isn't passionate or trying to engage me, I'm done. I'm out, tuned out. So while inevitably I lose people, not every word I say keeps student engaged, I try a few different approaches and modalities to capture and invite more people into the learning, and encourage engagement across various learning styles. So while asynchronous online learning presents limitations, there's a lot of opportunities for creativity as well. So these are just a few simple slides, just really, really basic. But icebreakers and energizers, I asked you to think a little bit about them. These techniques are what we use to introduce participants to each other, whether that's in a short, 2-hour workshop setting on a farm, or whether it's a 13-week class. So the longer the session is relative to the proportion of the amount of time we'll spend doing icebreakers. If I'm teaching a 2-hour workshop, I'm not going to do 1 hour of icebreakers, likely. So we want folks to get to know each other, to relax, to break the ice, of course, and to wake up, capture wandering interests. And so there are a lot of, and there's no one best practice for this is the icebreaker for the thing, but I've been trying to get more creative in the ways that we do this. So we could do a free write prompt, we could share with a neighbor, interview a neighbor. Asynchronously, I'll try to be, incorporating things that you can do yourself, and also just explain things that I would do in a live setting as well. So we'll be looking at a little bit of both. When there's also an energizer. So an energizer would be that if you feel like energetically after the session has begun, maybe the energy is shifting, and that's something that you can tune into the more practice you have in leading a group. And how can I do something that either if the energy or the shift or low energy is because maybe I'm talking too much, like how do we get people talking to each other? How do I energize the space? Maybe it's movement activity. So maybe I invite you to stand up and reach your arms up, or even just if you're sitting, stretch your arms up, shake your hands out, stuff like that. Clap your hands a couple times, like especially with kids, getting kids in their body, like run around and scream 3 times, or say the name of this plant 3 times, something like that to really get the energy, and then focus again, bring folks back in. So we'll be talking more about this. But I also want to acknowledge that we're a blend of all learning styles. And so I know when I see these learning profile quizzes and surveys, I'm like, don't try to put me in a box. I contain multitudes, right? And we all do. So I'm not trying to put anybody in a box. My hope is to activate some self-awareness, reactivate some awareness, revisit some things that maybe you haven't looked at in a while, and use this as an entry point for exploration and discussion. So we're going to shine some light on our tendencies as learners, habits, patterns, and sometimes our strengths and preferences, and they evolve over time, right? So I've taken this test so many times, and it, more or less is the same, but sometimes I notice a little bit of a shift. And so I've seen students shift quite a bit. I had a TA who did it and got something radically different the next time, and acknowledged that they were really going through a huge transformation, and that impacts our learning and our learning styles. So there's no one right way to learn, and revealing preferences for your learning style stimulates critical thinking about your own individual learning approach, so you can best match, this is what I need as a learner, this is how I should study. And then also thinking about it again with those 2 hats on. If I were to teach this lesson, how would I engage people who like to read, write? How do I engage visual folks? How do I engage kinesthetics folks? You're not going to get everything in every lesson every time, right? But just thinking about it in your design. And so for teachers, it's really, their learning styles are important tools for students, because, I think a lot of times we don't teach students, whether we're in a formal setting or a non-formal setting, how they learn. We don't provide space for reflection on that. And so as a teacher, it's really important in your design. If I'm like, these are my objectives for this class, I want to make sure that I'm providing multiple modalities and ways to really get that objective across, because someone might not get it the first time. So in agriculture, for example, and I don't know our group yet very well, but many students and participants in these kinds of learning settings are partially kinesthetic. And so they're choosing your workshop because they're drawn to hands-on or experiential learning. And so in the stories that you share and reflect on in Blackboard, you can include a moment or think about moments where you've learned outside of the classroom, because I'm here to remind us and engage that learning happens beyond just classroom settings. So we're going to be looking at formal learning that we do in schools and non-formal learning that happens every day, and looking at the differences. So There are, of course, weaknesses in these tools, and I'm not going through these each, but you'll see these when you take the online survey. You'll see the results. I'm just putting them up here. So the 4 learning styles that this test really looks at are visual, oral, read, write, and kinesthetic, hence the acronym VARK. And then there's multimodal, which you'll see more of when you engage in the shorts. It's a short test. I'll put an optional one up there that's like 70 questions that you can print out if you like this kind of thing. And it has different language in the way it frames the learning styles, but just so that you know and have that as a resource. As you do this, there are weaknesses and blind spots of these kinds of tests. Like, it's a tool, right? It's a conversation starter. And it's, those kinds of exams can be convoluted. I know I'm like pretty skeptical when I'm taking one of those tests. I'm like, I know what box you're trying to put me in, and I'm not going to let you. So, then that might influence how I answer the questions, right? So it's just an awareness tool. They're archetypes, they're incomplete, right? But like I said, Hooks talks about her personal experience, the author of the reading that you're looking at, and how and why she felt engaged and disengaged as a learner in her experience. And she touches on aspects of social identity, which we'll get into later this semester. And while her experience might be really different than yours, and she's not talking about agriculture, I'm using this piece as a conversation starter, just like I'm using this survey as a conversation starter for us to really be in a deeper inquiry about learning. And that's our entry point to this class, so that we can have and build on conversations about farm-based learning and ag learning and garden learning and working with children and curriculum and all these things. So in closing, as we move through this semester, I'm going to ask you to consider, with your teacher hat on, if you're, receiving this lesson as a student, or you're listening to these lecturettes, or you're in your other classes, perhaps those of you who are doing other classes, if you're going to design your own lesson, thinking about, before I dive into leading this thing or this class or this workshop, how could I first allow and prioritize time to build community, even if it's 5 minutes. And that's what we do with the introductory forum in this class, right? And you do that in other classes too, but having folks share a picture, having folks share a story, having for the first couple of weeks, folks bring in an item that means something to them and tell stories. I've seen all different kinds of things, and you'll read about some of that in the resources for icebreakers I'm including. And as you brainstorm other icebreakers, and remember and recall other icebreakers that you've done that have been more or less effective, right? If I were to conduct this activity for a community group or my 3rd grade class, or whatever context you're engaged in or thinking about, learners on your farm, how would I adapt it? How could I engage visual, oral, read, write, kinesthetic, multimodal, social, solitary learners, right? And who, if I'm looking at an activity I might lead, if I want to lead a lesson on, foraging on my farm, who might get left out, who might get excluded? And, we're not maybe going to be able to include everyone in every single workshop, but just the awareness of that is significant. And it's an ongoing question that we're going to keep asking ourselves, is how can we make this more inclusive? So these are just some things to leave you with, and to frame what we're up to this week. And I look forward to reading your discussion post. If you have questions, of course, let me know. Have a good week, everyone.